Welcome in to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel for Transfer Portal All Access, alongside our Transfer Portal expert, Chris Hummer, and our resident coach and National College Football analyst, Carl Reed. I'm Emily Proud, and we will be with you for the next 2 hours. We also have a few more special guests joining us. Bud Elliott of the Cover 3 podcast is here, and a member of our rankings team, Clint Brewster. We will make sure that you are all caught up on everything that happened in this portal offseason, including all of those major moves. We got best fits, big misses, but the main reason we are here today is we have just released our final transfer portal rankings. And the big news is we have 2 new 5-stars to the list: Texas wide receiver transfer A.D. Mitchell and LSU transfer cornerback Denver Harris. Here is our transfer portal rankings expert, Clint Brewster, on why those 2 earned 5-star status.
Thanks, Emily. The first riser we'll talk about is A.D. Mitchell. He's a wide receiver going to Texas from Georgia. 6'4", springy, athletic, supremely talented catch radius wide receiver. He made a name for himself as a true freshman at Georgia. He was able to get behind the Alabama defense in the 2021 national championship game and go for a 40-yard touchdown. He's got amazing hands and ability to track the ball deep. Great route detail for a younger player that still has a great upside. He'll complement Xavier Worthy and the Texas receivers really well on the outside. Steve Sarkisian knows how to get the ball vertical. He had one of those wow catches in the spring game. He might come back better than he was before the injury that he sustained in 2022. He's got the ability to be a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. The next riser on the list goes up to 5-star status as a sophomore cornerback, Denver Harris, going to LSU from Texas A&M. He played 211 snaps as a true freshman for the Aggies last season. Harris is a sticky cover corner that plays with a chip on his shoulder. He's got remarkable change of direction, quickness, and reactionary skills, speed to carry routes vertically, very tough in run support. He had 3 pass breakups against Mississippi State and 4 tackles against Alabama last year. He had some really good games. He played at only 175 pounds last season, so there's still some physical upside and development that needs to happen. But I talked to a source at LSU last week who said that he's done everything right since he's been on campus, and he's been better than expected as a player. Everybody knows that LSU can produce some NFL cornerbacks.
Thank you, Clint. We'll see you back here a little bit later. So here you have it, our top 10 transfer portal rankings. Again, these are completely changed. Not a ton of change, though, I guess I would say. They're pretty much the same when it comes to the guys that we have. There is one new addition to this group. It's Deshaun McCullough moving up. Deshaun McCullough is moving up a couple of spots, but the only new addition to this group, we'll talk about him in just a little bit, but I want to hit on one of the top transfer portal players from this spring window, because we do want to tie a bow on this spring window. Not nearly as crazy as what we saw in that first window, but defensive tackle Bear Alexander heading to USC, definitely a big headliner. What do we need to know about this new addition to this USC defense?
Well, I would say the Bear Alexander situation was pretty crazy enough to make a couple headlines on its own, but now that he's at USC, he's a huge addition for the Trojans. They don't make a lot of 300-pound people who move the way he does. He is a penetrating defensive tackle. He's somebody who fits pretty well in Alex Grinch's scheme, and he's exactly what USC needs. Like, USC did not have these players last year. USC lacked size inside. USC lacked pass rushing inside a season ago. And Bear Alexander helped solve all of those issues for a team with championship aspirations.
Chris, very few people needed interior help as bad as USC did with the way that they were both on run defense and on pass defense, needing immediate impact on the defensive front. Getting Bear Alexander to come in from Georgia, huge get. A guy who can play the 3 technique, can slide over and still play the 1 shade in Grinch's defense, can rush the passer from the inside A gap and the B gap like you need to be able to do in the Pac-12 with the way the quarterbacks throw the ball around. He's going to be a huge addition as USC is trying to compete for a national championship. You get the big bear in the middle to help try to get your defense going the way you need it to win games.
Certainly it looks the part, and certainly a need for that USC defense. The only new addition to that top 10 was wide receiver Devontae Walker, but I want to talk about another wide receiver moving up in the rankings, earning that 5-star status, and that is, of course, the guy that we just mentioned in Keon Coleman. What kind of player is him that makes him maybe that top, or excuse me, A.D. Mitchell? What is it that makes him that top wide receiver?
A.D. Mitchell, coming from the University of Georgia, head to Texas, a guy who can play multiple spots. He lines up on the outside. He can catch everything up the sideline and within the hashes, and he can come in the slot and do some work in the middle of the field too. When you got a guy like Steve Sarkisian and the way that he calls offense, he can take a kid like this and he can do a ton of things with him. One of the brightest offensive minds in football, not just college football, but NFL background as well. This is a huge get for the Texas Longhorns. With the quarterback play that they have, Quinn Ewers returning, I expect for this to be a very explosive addition to the Texas Longhorns.
As crazy as it sounds, given the way Texas recruited, wide receiver was a big problem for them last year. It was Xavier Worthy or bust for a lot of the year, and Xavier was also hurt with a hand injury. So Texas never really could run the offense maybe the way Steve Sarkisian would have. It also didn't help that Quinn Ewers was a first-year starting quarterback. A.D. Mitchell is somebody Stetson Bennett called the best receiver in college football a season ago, and we've seen him show up huge in the biggest moments the last couple seasons in the college football playoff. If you add him to a group that includes Xavier Worthy, Isaiah Neer, Jordan Whittington, that's one of the best quartets in the entire country at receiver. And Texas is going to be in excellent shape for the explosive offense they really hope to have, and they're going to be passing game reliant this year.
Another guy earning that 5-star status is Denver Harris, adding to that secondary at LSU. Chris, what does he add to that group?
Well, if you look at Denver Harris and his stats from last year, he was one of the best corners in the country, full stop, when he was on the field. Staying on the field was a bit of an issue for Denver Harris. He was ultimately suspended at Texas A&M, ended up at LSU. But if he is playing football, he is a future first-round draft pick on the field. He's an excellent man-to-man corner. He's going to be huge for an LSU defense that needed a revamp in the cornerback area, and they added several this offseason. But Denver Harris has about as high as upside as anybody in the portal.
Feels a major need for LSU as they're trying to compete for national championships. Brian Kelly, Emily, has said this is their time. They beat Alabama this year. They needed help on the back end. Denver Harris is a guy. If he stays on the football field, Chris just said it, first round potential here. DBU, LSU, this is a big, big time get for the Tigers.
Once again, the only new addition to that top 10 is wide receiver Devontae Walker. What will he provide to Drake May in terms of a talent at wide receiver?
Well, he did great things at Kent State, obviously a Group of 5 school, and that's one of the themes that we're going to see several Group of 5 players who got the call to the big leagues. He's going and playing with a generational quarterback. So when you put a wide receiver talent like him who can run the entire route tree, both inside and outside, and you put him with a quarterback like Drake May, you're going to have an offensive explosion in Chapel Hill. He's going to do big, big things in the ACC conference this year.
Yeah, I don't think anybody was happier with this addition than Drake May. They obviously needed a new #1 receiver to come in after losing Josh Downs to the NFL, and Devontae Walker has that type of potential. He had a huge spring from North Carolina based on everything we've heard at 24/7 Sports, and I think he's positioned to potentially lead the ACC in receiving yards because that's the type of ceiling you have when you play with Drake May as your quarterback. And I think Devontae Walker is going to be huge for them.
Chris, is there anybody else in this top 10 that stands out to you?
I am a huge fan of Sam Hartman. I think Sam Hartman to Notre Dame is going to be the biggest and most consequential transfer addition of the offseason. Sam Hartman is somebody that I think completely transforms a Notre Dame offense that struggled to really, frankly, consistently throw the ball a season ago. He was one of the best deep ball passers in college football last year, and Notre Dame was one of the worst offenses in terms of stretching the field. Sam Hartman opens up the offense for Notre Dame, and he also gives a group of young receivers somebody reliable to kind of work with. The guys like Jaden Greathouse coming in from Austin Westlake as a true freshman and somebody who's going to have a big impact. So I think he's going to be huge for Notre Dame.
Yeah, Sam Hartman was one of the biggest additions to that early transfer portal window. But as we tie a bow on this spring portal window, who's somebody that stands out to you that made the move late in spring?
Somebody that I really like, Emily, is Caleb Brown, wide receiver from Ohio State, going to the University of Iowa. We talked all last season. We know how bad the University of Iowa was on offense, and they addressed their needs. Caleb Brown is a guy who got caught behind a log jam with some really talented guys. He's going to give Cade McNamara one of the receiving targets that he needs. They also added help at Eric All at tight end in the earlier part of the portal. And so I think he's going to add some explosiveness and give them a skill set that they can use to move the ball downfield.
I really like Logan Diggs going from Notre Dame to LSU. A lot of Notre Dame and LSU talk heard so far. But Logan Diggs is a Louisiana native. He's somebody that really wanted to go to LSU out of high school, ended up at Notre Dame for Brian Kelly. They're reunited now. And LSU is a pretty deep backfield. They bring back guys like Noah Cain and Josh Emery. But that's a team that struggled to get consistent production from that position. It's why they rotated so much a season ago. I think Logan Diggs is going to come in and be part of that committee early on, but as the season goes along, he is the type of back you can rely on to be a true running back one in the SEC. And I think if LSU, as they make this potential national title push, I think Logan Diggs will be a huge part of that.
Jair Shorter is a guy from North Texas going to Auburn. And when you think about the SEC West, and when you think about Hugh Freeze's offense and the way he likes to play, you need a lot of speed. Shorter's going to bring deep field speed, a guy who can take the top off of the defense, you can go to on third down, you can go to in long passing situations when you're trying to open the field up. This is a major addition for Auburn, and he has the speed and the skill to play in the SEC West.
Guys, breaking down some underrated players that came out of the spring transfer portal window. Overall, pretty quiet, unless, of course, you're in Boulder, Colorado. It is very difficult to talk about the transfer portal without talking about what Coach Prime has done in terms of turning over that roster. 50 total portal additions. Only 6, however, are part of our top 247. Converse that to, 56 portal losses. So much turnover, 30 losses since that spring game. This is something that we really have never seen before, despite the fact that Coach Prime, will give him his credit, he did warn us that there was going to be a lot of change in this offseason. But Chris, you followed the transfer portal so closely. Just how unique is what we saw Colorado do in the portal this offseason?
Well, my teachers growing up always said not to say unique, but I certainly think it qualifies here for Colorado because this has never happened before. You have a team turning over more than 50% of their roster in one offseason. And the transfer portal allows you to do that, obviously. We've seen some schools aggressively turn over their roster. Texas State, for example, took an all-transfer portal class 2 years ago. But we've never seen somebody essentially run off like 70 to 80% of their roster. And it is both a cult of personality that Deion Sanders allows this to happen and some little rule things that he's taken advantage of. But it's certainly never happened in college football before like this.
One of the reasons we're calling it unique, Emily, and that we've never seen it because it wasn't allowed. The transfer portal is something that is still new territory for us, and being able to change your roster is something that you have to do. There are college coaches all over the country that wish that they could change their roster. They wish they could make an improvement at linebacker or at corner or at running back, but they haven't been allowed or given the longitude to do that. In a situation like this, when you're taking over for a 1-11 football team, changes have to come. Coaches are getting fired for losing, period. And coaches all over the country are making changes. Now, he made the most drastic change, but he also had the most drastic situation with his roster going in. So I think it is unique initially, but over the next couple of years, we'll see similar things from other programs as people look to add talent to their roster.
Seems like a perfect storm with the different rule changes. Of course, you can't talk unique without talking about the head man and Coach Prime and everything that he has done throughout his career as a player and then now as a coach. It's been very interesting to pay attention to. But guys, we have 2 other members of our team today that I want to send it over to in our Studio B. It's Bud Elliott and Clint Brewster. Hey, guys.
I'm Bud Elliott. He's part of the 24/7 Sports College Football Transfer Rankings team. And Clint, you just heard them talking about Colorado. Hey, Emily. Hey, Carl. Hey, Hummer. What do you think about what Colorado's done so far?
I mean, it's unprecedented. It's crazy to see what's going on, but Deion's got to do what he's got to do to win. He understands that the lifespan of a college head coach now can be 1, 2, 3 years. So he knows it's a cutthroat business. He's got to do what he's got to do. 70 guys leave, but I think that they upgraded in many key positions. Running back, I really like Shedeur Sanders, obviously. E.J. Horton was a wide receiver that they really got. I think that they upgraded really in some of the skill positions and some of the speed players that they lost. E.J. Horton coming from Marshall to Colorado, he was one that I really liked. He's a 4.3 guy, so they really got some speed there.
If you look at what Tennessee did last year on offense, they're going to run a very similar offense. That it's that veer and shoot system that you've seen previously at Baylor. We saw Sean Lewis, the OC at Colorado, formerly the head coach at Kent State, run it. I really like what they did with Jimmy Horn, Xavier Weaver. I agree with you. I think at the skill positions, Colorado has nailed this about as well as you could expect. What did they win? One game last year, two? And it wasn't many. Yeah. So I think from that standpoint, they've absolutely crushed this. Now, I do have some questions about the depth they were able to assemble along the lines of scrimmage, particularly on the defensive line. If you're going to play that veer and shoot, you're going to be running 800, 850, maybe 900 snaps in a season. That's going to test your depth along the lines of scrimmage, particularly along the defensive line of scrimmage, because there's going to be days when you're playing a Utah or at Oregon State where you go 3 and out quite a bit, and all of a sudden that defense is having to play 80, 90 snaps. What does it look like depth-wise for them? How important will it be for Colorado to stay healthy, considering maybe the drop-off of quality depth they're able to assemble through the portal?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that the O-line and D-line are huge emphasis for them, and they can still add some players going forward. They still have some room to add with those guys, but they got Shane Cokes was one guy I really liked that they got from Dartmouth. He could really do some things on the defensive line, but you're right. I think that's a big question mark is on the offensive and defensive lines. Can they hold up? Against TCU, we'll see in the first game of the season.
Absolutely. So we have a lot of our fans here on social media. Appreciate you guys watching on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Like and subscribe if you're catching us live. If you're watching us as a replay, hey, do the same thing. Let's get to some of these questions. All right. So this is from Andy Danielson. Appreciate Andy watching the show for us. Said, who's your personal favorite under the radar transfer for this cycle?
I'm going to go with quarterback Christian Veilleux. He came from Penn State, going to Pitt. Quarterback, 6'4", 205. He's got some mobility. He's got some arm talent. He won some games for Penn State as a true freshman. He threw 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. So the stage isn't too big for him there at Penn State. He goes to Pittsburgh, and he's in a battle to win the starting quarterback job there. But I think that he's a guy kind of down the road. I think he still has 3 years left. He can be a good player for Pitt at some point. I really like what he brings.
I think that's a great answer, man. Honestly, like you think about this, when he was coming out of high school, we knew about him. We knew he had big-time tools, and we knew he was fairly raw. He wasn't a guy that passed for 6,000 yards at the high school level, and he would need some time to develop. And when he committed to Penn State, he really couldn't have known that they were going to land Drew Allar come along, who just may be a total stud. And there's no shame in having to transfer, go somewhere that's going to allow you to develop on your own timeline a little bit better and realize some of those physical tools and turn them in to production. So I definitely think there's some opportunity there for him to play, and we'll have to see. They also got Phil Jurkovec there at Pitt, and I mean, even if Jurkovec wins the job this year, they could still have Christian play for 2 more seasons. So I'm definitely in for that pick. I like that one. I'm going to go with Sean Tyler, who's transferring to Minnesota. Now, they lose Muhammad Ibrahim, who was a huge part of their offense. I mean, Minnesota's passing game, if you guys listen to Cover 3, we talked about this on the summer school series, was non-existent last year. If Mo Ibrahim wasn't getting the ball 40 times a game and running for 250, that offense was dead in the water. And Sean Tyler, I think, brings a little bit different elements. They do have some turnover there on the offensive line. I was just looking at their depth chart earlier. He's going to be a really important piece for them, because even though I think Minnesota this year will try to throw the football a little bit more, I think it'll be really important for them to maintain that run game. That is kind of their identity. It allows Joe's defense up there to stay fresh and win ball games for them on the defensive side of the football. So I think Sean Tyler going to Minnesota is a nice get for them. And there's a lot of good football players that we have as 3 stars who they're not going to be NFL draft guys, but they're very useful pieces at the college level.
I agree, 100%.
All right, let's go to Clint. Not this Clint. This is Clint Parks. He says, any game changers left here in the portal? Are there anybody left out here, Clint?
Well, there's not many. We all know that 70% of the players in the portal in the spring window didn't start a college game yet. So that just kind of tells you what was out there. But Zachary Franklin, the wide receiver from UTSA, he caught almost 1,200 yards, 15 touchdowns in 2022. He's 6'1", 185. He's got really good speed, really good route runner. I think that he could do some great things for somebody. He averaged 13 yards a catch, 93 receptions. I mean, that was 7th in college football. He doesn't have a home quite yet, but I think some teams would love to add him.
And I think it's important to understand why some of these players are still in the portal, right? For some of them, it's just going to come down to grades or credits, right? They need to graduate before they can dip out and go to the school they want to go. Maybe some schools are ready to take them now academically. Maybe some schools are not. So I'm not saying that's necessarily the case with Franklin, but in my mind, that's a player like if you guys play any college fantasy or DFS, like you're constantly picking and betting on Zachary Franklin because he's a total stud and is just a monster for UTSA. So the fact that he's still in the portal, maybe that suggests there's some stuff he has to finish up in order to get to where he wants to go. But like that to me that's the name that would make you sort of say, maybe you're moving your projection from like 7.5 to 8 wins for a team that lands him. But I think he'll be an upper level player, assuming whatever he needs to get done happens to get done. I'm going to go with Josh Wallace, an interesting defensive back from UMass. Yeah, UMass has some players. They weren't very good last year, but it doesn't mean all their players are bad. He's a guy that's getting a lot of interest from some Big Ten schools. I think could be a valuable member of a secondary there. I think what Michigan was taking a look at him, I saw reported earlier. So really interesting to see what his recruitment looks like. And everybody out there would love to add another valuable guy who can play corner, can play in the nickel, and a lot of different versatility, because you can never have enough of those guys, especially when you get to the college football playoff, because pretty much everybody at that level can throw the football. You know, Big Ten, not everybody throws the ball great. When you get to the playoff, though, everybody does. So definitely need that depth. Let's go to Brian Jones here, and probably not the Brian Jones from CBS Sports Network, but maybe. I don't know. Brian, if you're watching, what's going on? Man, we'll see you pretty soon at SC Media Days. He asks, who will be the Hendon Hooker, Tyree Wilson second-year transfer leap type player this year? So the guy that was in last year's class, portal-wise, but is now going to take that leap.
Yeah, I'm going with Quinn Ewers. Big fan of Quinn Ewers. You know, he cut the mullet off. It's a new Quinn Ewers. It's a new feel for him. You know, he only completed 58% of his passes last season, so I think that he really needs to get better in that and just throwing with a purpose. You know, valuing the football. You know, I think that he has a huge year with the familiarity that he has now in the system with Sarkisian. I think that they've put some great players around him. 5-star A.D. Mitchell, now Xavier Worthy,
Isaiah Nair coming back.
Yeah. Isaiah Nair. I mean, he's got some weapons. That offense should just be humming. I don't see how Quinn Ewers doesn't have a great year and improve on what he did last year.
Totally agree, and the pressure's on him certainly because they have some talented backups there in Austin. All right, you took Quinn. I'm going to go ahead and take Kingsley Suamatea, and I mispronounced his name, but I don't mispronounce his level of talent. It's big. Signed with Oregon out of high school, was a 5-star offensive tackle for us. Transfers to BYU. We already did the summer school episode on BYU on Cover 3. Have heard nothing but great things there. Expect him to be an immediate impact tackle in the Big 12, which actually has some nice tackles this year. Like, I know Oklahoma lost both their guys to the league, but like Caleb Banks is at Texas, and there's some decent dudes in that league. BYU, a nice tackle tandem with Caleb Etienne, who transferred from Oklahoma State, as well as Kingsley. So I think that's a dude, if everything clicks, it's clear NFL upside, and it sounds like things are moving in the right direction there. So very excited to watch him, and tackle may not be the sexiest position to watch, but it is desperately needed. Let's go to Nate Atkins here. So this is kind of a meta question, but if you happen to be a recruit watching us, he writes, what should a player do if they entered the portal upon some bad advice and haven't found a home yet?
That's an interesting question, and I think that it happens to a lot of kids around the country right now. There's so many guys who don't have a home, we're maybe lower level Power 5 or G5 kids. There's a lot of them out there still in the portal. But I think a huge thing you can do now is go to transfer portal camps. Now, like Nebraska, Marshall, some other schools are having exposure camps for kids who are in the transfer portal without a home. And you got to kind of go back to your high school recruiting process and really kind of get yourself out there again. And it's like recruiting yourself out of high school. And you can ask a coach if you can come back to that particular school. I know some coaches don't allow kids to come back once they've been in the transfer portal. I don't think that that's a bad rule. You know, once you've left, I personally wouldn't let a kid back on the roster, but you know, it's a new day, it's a new age. You know, it's kind of an interesting question, but there's a lot of kids in that circumstance.
Totally agree. Like if you can go somewhere and post a verified time, that I think that's going to be the most important thing. Schools want to know, okay, we probably can find your data on you coming out of high school. How have you improved? Even if you haven't seen the field much, right? Are you faster now? Are you bigger? Can we get some verified data on you that allows us to see, okay, 2 years in the program, he's progressed in this way physically. Let's talk to his former coaches. I agree. Like, I don't know that I would let everybody back on, but I do think in this wild kind of West world we're living in of the portal, like this is the first year of the 2-window plus NIL type system. I'm sure some guys jumped in because they thought they were going to get money that never ended up materializing. But that to me makes a lot of sense. Let's go to another question here. We're taking some live questions as we do on 24/7 Sports. Clint, this one is interesting for you, and this comes from Tyler Chambers. I don't know if we have it on the screen, but I have it on my Slack right here. Who was the most hotly debated player in the 24/7 Sports transfer rankings?
Oh man, that's a tough question. You know, we had a lot of debate about A.D. Mitchell and making him a 5-star. You know, he had the knee injury. He had production as a true freshman at Georgia. You know, he was able to get over the top in the national championship and have a 40-yard touchdown against Alabama in 2021. And then he didn't play much in 2022. He had the knee injury. You know, we weren't sure how he was going to come back from that. He was in the spring game at Texas, had an amazing catch there for a touchdown, but still, you know, there was just still a lot of unknowns. But, you know, we love what he brings to the table. You know, 6'4", 200 pounds, catch radius, long speed, deep speed. You know, he's got route detail underneath. I love what he brings. But you know, you want to make sure that his knee is okay, that the injury is okay, and I think we got some good feedback.
That's a talent you want to bet on, right? I mean, think about like all we heard from Georgia insiders all last year was, hey, this team's going to run through the SEC. They're facing a good but not great LSU team in the SEC championship game. Just wait until A.D. Mitchell gets back. And it was like all we heard, like the guys behind the scenes. Watch, A.D. Mitchell's starting to practice. Watch this. Like they may need him against Ohio State. We know he had a big catch against TCU. That's the kind of guy that you want to bet on. So definitely think that makes a lot of sense. Clint, I enjoyed this, man. We should jump back. But right now, we're going to transfer portal over to Emily in Studio A. Guys, like and subscribe to the channel.
Well done, Bud. Thank you guys so much for answering all of those questions, and thank you to our viewers for submitting them. We are continuing to monitor the chat, too. If you're not a part of that, it's because you're not subscribed to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, so make sure that you do that. Also, check out the 247sports.com. That is where you can see all of the transfer portal rankings. We highly recommend that you use this QR code. It'll take you right there. You can also purchase an annual VIP membership where you will get information that you cannot find anywhere else. Guys, it's time to hit the fits and misses of the transfer portal, and we like to promote positivity here on this show and at 24/7 Sports. So we're going to start with some of the best fits, and I know we already talked a little bit about Sam Hartman and what he can bring to Notre Dame, but when you look at the turnover in terms of who's calling plays for Notre Dame this year and everything that we've seen happen, what do you like so much about the fit, specifically at Notre Dame for Hartman?
Well, I think he just brings something to the table that Notre Dame has lacked for a long time. They haven't really had a quarterback of his caliber since Ian Book was on campus, and you could argue that Sam Hartman's a more productive college quarterback than Ian Book. I think he really allows Notre Dame to stretch the field vertically in a way they haven't before, opens up the offense in that regard for Joe Parker, the new offensive coordinator. I think he's going to make a lot of young receivers on that roster better, which is huge as you're trying to develop that room. And more than anything, he's a 6-year college football quarterback. He brings a steadiness and experience that can help that process of adjustment to that new scheme. So I think he's going to be really good for Notre Dame.
Emily, Sam Hartman gives you the ability as an offensive coordinator to run your entire offense. All over the country, guys have to pull down their playbook a little bit. You can only do certain things because a guy is really limited at what he can do. You get a veteran leader. He's going to be able to help young receivers adjust. He's going to be able to make plays. He's going to have complete control of what they're doing offensively. And also coming from Wake Forest, he can help young guys understand what it's like to play at a school that also has high academics. And so his leadership in that locker room is also something that can't be wavered on when you think about that versus not just what's going on the football field. So Sam Hartman was a home run hit for a program who needed a quarterback. He's going to be worth 3 or 4 big wins all on his own. And so this was a major, major home run for Notre Dame.
3 or 4. So you think you have him like in the playoff with 3 to 4?
Hey, we're creeping. I'm not ready to go there yet, but we're creeping. Like, they're going to have a chance. Marcus Freeman is going to get the defensive end. Sam Hartman, though, he's going to have the Fighting Irish real happy at the end of the season.
I do agree. I think Sam Hartman's worth at least 1 or 2 wins based on their quarterback play from last year. I think this puts Notre Dame, I know the schedule's a little tough this year, but I think Sam Hartman puts Notre Dame back in that 10-win category pretty easily.
Definitely a lot of excitement there for Irish fans. Meanwhile, down at Florida State, they've got their quarterback. Now they're just fitting in some pieces. They add tight end Jaheim Bell out of South Carolina. What can he add to this Mike Norvell offense?
Jaheim Bell is a pro's pro. He's the total package at tight end. I'm really, really big on Bell and what he is as a football player. And Mike Norvell is awesome at using guys with multidimensional skill sets. Bell can line up on the line of scrimmage. He can flex out. You can motion him around as an H. This is a special, special talent with going to a team with a great quarterback. And expectations in Tallahassee are high again. If they can get over the Clemson hump, we'll talk a little bit about that later,
tease,
then
yeah.
it can be special times in Tallahassee again for the Seminoles.
I don't think there's a better fit in the transfer portal than Jaheim Bell and Mike Norvell and Alex Adkins, their offensive coordinator, with the way they use their tight ends like in a very unique and unique way and flexible way. They move their players around all the time and kind of that spread option that they run. They use guys like Jaheim Bell as an H-back, as a tight end, as a wide receiver, potentially as a running back like he was at South Carolina last year. I think that's a perfect marriage for a team that all of a sudden, with some of their other additions like Keon Coleman this spring, just has a bounty of riches to mess with. And if you have somebody as flexible as Jaheim Bell to put him in different places, a true queen on the chessboard, your offense is going to be really dangerous and difficult to deal with, especially with somebody like Jordan Travis pulling the trigger.
Very exciting stuff down in Florida State, too. Anytime we're talking transfer portal, we're always talking about what Mike Norvell has done in the portal. All right, speaking of big wins, Devin Leary, of course, a big one for Kentucky, but a fit that we actually want to talk about when it comes to the Cats is the running back in Ray Davis. What does he add to Kentucky?
Well, he's just a classic Kentucky running back. He's good after contact. He averaged over 3 yards after contact last year. He forced a lot of missed tackles for Vanderbilt because you kind of had to with the way that offensive line was. A season ago for Vanderbilt, there was over 50 forced missed tackles last season. And if Kentucky's offensive line can be a little bit better, we could see another 1,000-yard back out of that backfield in Lexington. I think Ray Davis is a perfect fit for Devin Leary, that offensive line, and what Kentucky likes to do offensively.
Ray Davis, a plug-and-play running back at Kentucky. You can never have enough guys who can run for 1,000 yards. I'm a run-the-rock guy. Everybody wants to throw the ball. We've talked a lot about Devin Leary, but having Ray Davis gives the Kentucky Wildcats a guy who can close games out when you're down the stretch and you're winning by 10, you're winning by 13 points, and you're trying to win a football game, especially when the weather changes. You have a guy now that you can turn around and hand the ball off to, and he can get first down after first down after first down. This is a big-time get for the Kentucky Wildcats. Don't neglect the running backs, Emily, because you still have to run the football to win big games.
Yeah, quarterback's best friend there. All right, so those were our picks for hits. We got to do it, though. Let's hit on some of those misses. And to help us out, we have brought in some help from our team site reporters, starting with Dave Biddle from Bucknuts on how Ohio State didn't quite knock it out of the park with addressing their need at offensive tackle.
To use a baseball analogy, Ohio State wanted to hit a home run in the transfer portal as far as filling their need at offensive tackle. They hit more of a double. They got a good player in Josh Simmons. He was a redshirt freshman at San Diego State last year, started all 13 games for the Aztecs at right tackle, played well if you watch the film. Too many penalties, but still played very well as a redshirt freshman. A guy that's going to come in and probably be the Buckeyes starting right tackle. No guarantee that he will be. They have a couple other guys that they like Tegra Shabola and Zen Mihalski, who rotated with the first team during spring ball. But I think Josh Simmons probably will be the starting right tackle for the Buckeyes. So again, they did a good job filling that need. Not necessarily a great job, but they did a good job filling that need at offensive tackle with Josh Simmons from San Diego State.
And heightened need at the offensive tackle position as they look to start a new quarterback for Ohio State. Meanwhile, at Auburn, the Tigers did address a need at quarterback in the spring window with Peyton Thorne, but Nathan King from Auburn Undercover says it wasn't necessarily their first choice.
The number one transfer priority for Hugh Freeze and Auburn this offseason was undoubtedly the quarterback position. Brought in a bunch of guys in the first portal window. They had Grayson McCall, wanted to get him on campus for a visit. There were some academic holdups there. They did bring in Devin Leary from NC State. He was actually a silent commit to Kentucky at the time. They kicked the tires on Spencer Sanders. He ends up going to their SEC West rival in Ole Miss. So they ultimately land on Peyton Thorne in that second portal window. He could be argued as the best quarterback in the second portal window in terms of experience, in terms of what he's accomplished on the Power 5 level. Not necessarily the most splashy addition in the world when you look at maybe some of the talent that was in there in the first portal window, but Auburn needed experience. He brings 49 touchdown passes to that room. That's 7 times what they had last season when they had the least efficient season of quarterback play in Auburn in 2 decades. So that's something that maybe brings this team from maybe 6-6, 7-5 in Hugh Freeze's first year. Maybe a guy like Peyton Thorne can get you another win, get you to the 7-8 win range.
Meanwhile, at Ole Miss, they do have the quarterback position covered and then some. But on the other side of things, the Rebels have some holes to fill at wide receiver. And David Johnson with Inside the Rebels tells us it ain't over yet.
Ole Miss finished second in the Keon Coleman sweepstakes, the transfer portal wide receiver out of Michigan State. Keon ends up at Florida State. He's one of the top portal players in the entire country. 6'4", 220 pounds, and you finish as the bridesmaid for one of the top receivers in the country. But Ole Miss is after Zachary Franklin, the 6 190 pound dynamic wide receiver out of Texas San Antonio. Franklin had back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons at UTSA, and he looks to bring that skill set to the SEC. Now, what we're hearing right now, little academic hurdle he's got to get over before he comes to Ole Miss. But the rumor in Oxford is he is a silent commitment. Should be a big playmaker entering that Ole Miss receivers room.
See what happens with Lane Kiffin, always bringing in a lot of those transfer players. We'll see if he lands him down in Coral Gables. Although Miami missed on some big-time targets, Cristobal still addressed a need there. Here's Gabby Urrutia from Inside the U with more.
One of Miami's biggest positions of need in the transfer portal, really this whole cycle, has been the defensive tackle spot. And they were able to get 2 in that December window with Thomas Gore and Branson Dean, 2 guys that performed well, but slightly on the smaller side. Neither one at that 6'2" mark, neither one hitting that 300-pound range. So that's really the body type that they were looking for. They missed, unfortunately, for a few different reasons, whether that be some credit transfer issues with some guys they felt like they could have gotten, or just, flat out losing some recruiting battles. So that was one situation that they were kind of managing through, working through. They did get a guy here in this April window with Anthony Campbell from Louisiana Monroe, 6'7", 290-pound range. They're really, really excited about what they have in him. But it did feel like they did kind of take some of those big swings and misses. You got the Tywan Malone, who Miami got for an official visit. He landed at Ohio State after visiting Miami. They took a look at Kevy Rose, who's a big defensive tackle from Louisiana Tech. He landed at Arkansas. Definitely a few more names that we can go through there. But, I think ultimately they did find a body type that they liked in Anthony Campbell, and they're definitely excited about him.
Probably sensing a theme here. They didn't get the big guys, but some of these teams still addressed the positions of need. Finally, South Carolina did not fill a big need at the running back spot, but J.C. Sherbert with the Big Spur says that Shane Beamer and company are not panicking.
South Carolina did not do what they had hoped to do in the transfer portal at the running back position here in this second open period. Gamecocks tried hard and went after Logan Diggs, the former Notre Dame running back. Ended up going back home to play for LSU. The Gamecocks gave it a good go. They also were slightly involved with a young man that ended up at Kentucky. But beyond that, the South Carolina staff did not feel like there were a lot of great, talented, difference-making backs in the portal. So as Shane Beamer said the other day, they're not canceling the program because they only have 4 scholarship running backs. They're going to go with DeCarrion Joyner, a converted quarterback, Juju McDowell, who's a third-year player, true freshman Dontavius Braswell, and Mario Anderson Jr., who is another portal addition from Newberry College in Division II. So it wasn't the portal period they had hoped, but the Gamecocks now focus on 2024 at that position to try to continue to rebuild the depth in that room.
Big thank you to all of our team site reporters for help with that coverage. If you are a fan of these teams, be sure to check out these great sites for unrivaled coverage and all the news and analysis you could ever need. If you're not a fan of these teams that you see on the board here, there's a really good chance that we still have a team site for your squad. We got them all across the country, so be sure to check out 247sports.com to find your team. It's time now to officially release our transfer portal all offense team. So here's Clint Brewster and Chris Hummer with the breakdown.
Thanks, Emily. Clint, there are obviously a ton of great quarterbacks in the transfer portal this offseason. Who's your pick for this all-transfer team?
I would take Sam Hartman first overall. He's like a Steve Nash point guard distributor, best in the country at processing, precision, timing, 13,000 yards in his career passing. Who would you take at running back?
And I don't have an NBA comparison. That was great. But I would go with Carson Steele at UCLA, coming over from Ball State. Carson Steele led the FBS in yards after contact last season. UCLA led the country in offensive line yards created before contact. So this is a perfect marriage. I think Carson Steele's going to have a huge year for the Bruins.
Nice. Next, at wide receiver, I would take Dominique Lovett from Missouri, going to Georgia, all-purpose weapon that can make plays vertical or underneath. He was third in the SEC in receiving yards in the regular season.
Well, Dominic Lovett was a replacement for my next pick, who's A.D. Mitchell at Texas now. And I want people to remember that Stetson Bennett called A.D. Mitchell the best receiver in the country when he's healthy, I guess, obviously. He has come up huge in the playoffs, and he has had a huge spring for Texas. I think he addresses a depth and health issue at Texas, and I think he's going to have a huge year for the Longhorns.
Nice. I would say the next receiver I would take is Devontae Walker from Kent State, going to North Carolina, 6'3", 195. He's a long boundary receiver. I think he could lead the country in receiving yards this year.
Woo, that's a prediction right there. I love it. At tight end, I would go with Jaheim Bell, coming over to Florida State. This is a perfect marriage for what Florida State does. Mike Norvell and Alex Adkins are two of the most creative offensive minds in the country. Jaheim Bell can do everything. He played running back for South Carolina last year. He can be an H-back. He can line up at tight end. He can be a receiver. I think this is an ideal marriage of scheme and player.
Nice. Next, I would take Dylan Wade, offensive tackle, going from Tulsa to Auburn. 2-year starter with athleticism and experience. Should be an upgrade at the position for Auburn.
Yeah, and on the other side of the line, I'm going to go with Jermaine Byers from UTEP to Florida State. This is an immediate plug-and-play starter on the offensive line for Florida State. I expect him to start on the right side. And Byers also comes with tremendous NFL upside. I can really see this being a guy that hears his name drafted in a year or two.
Okay, nice. At the interior guard position, I'm going to take Javion Cohen, going from Alabama to Miami. He's a big-bodied, wide guard. He's going to start right away. He's a plug-and-play guy in the ACC. I think he'll move a lot of bodies there.
And at the other guard spot, I'm going to shout out Waxahachie, Texas legend Ladarius Henderson, coming over from Arizona State to Michigan. He can play every single position on the line of scrimmage except for center. I think he's a really versatile piece. He's joining a Joe Moore winning offensive line, and I think he's going to be a really important depth piece and an upgrade for them wherever they need to put him.
Okay, nice. At the center position, I'm taking Avery Jones, going from ECU once again to Auburn. Athletic experience, 93 overall grade in the transfer portal rankings as the top center overall.
All right, Clint, the real question with this team is, this is obviously a good squad, really good receivers, but how would it fare if you put it in a conference and asked it to perform against top-flight defenses every week?
I think that they would win in the ACC and the Pac-12. They're a little bit light in the interior spots, but I like the wide receivers. Love the quarterback in Sam Hartman.
100%. I think this is a Big 12 winner. I think this is a Pac-12 winner. I think this is an ACC winner. But I do think the offensive line would be the downfall of this team in the Big 10 or the SEC. I just don't see this lineup along the offensive line competing with the Georgias and the Alabamas of the world.
Agreed.
All right, so here is one last look at our all-offense transfer team. There was a little debate internally on how this team could do if they were put in a certain conference. I'm not going to say which conference we think they'd fare better in than others, but that is a conversation for another day. Either way, really strong group of people here. We talked a lot about Sam Hartman and what he is going to bring to Notre Dame, and a lot of those wide receivers that we saw move in that spring transfer portal window. And yet we see a lot of guys that we saw maybe a little bit earlier in the portal. But either way, it was a very exciting offseason. We showed you the offense, but now let's release our transfer portal all-defense team and head back to the guys.
Thanks, Emily. Clint, defense time. Who are you taking at the edge position?
I'm taking Jordan Birch, former 5-star from South Carolina, going to Oregon, 6'6", 275. He can be a terror if he puts it all together at Oregon.
On the other side, I'm going to go with Andre Carter, who's coming from Western Michigan to Indiana. This is somebody who drew rave reviews from my sources this spring. I think he's going to be a terror for Indiana off the edge. I think he's going to pop up in games against Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State this year. And I think he's going to be an early round draft pick. A lot of upside there.
Great. Next, I would take, at defensive tackle, I would take Bear Alexander, going from Georgia to USC. USC went all in on him. He has all conference ability. He can play the even or odd front. He could be a great player.
I'm going to go with Braden Fisk, who's coming from Western Michigan to Florida State as the other defensive tackle. Really like this guy. Former 240-pound defensive end who's now 300 pounds. He still moves like somebody much smaller. He can play everything needed along the defensive line, really any position along that group. He creates pressure. He's good against the run. Going to be really big for a Florida State defensive line that has a ton of depth.
All right, at linebacker, I'm going with Ernest Hausman from Nebraska to Michigan. He's the top overall linebacker. Really a physical specimen, can run sideline to sideline, drop deep into coverage, played 475 snaps as a true freshman for Nebraska. So Michigan's really getting a productive player.
Absolutely, they're really in love with him. On the other linebacker spot, I'm going to go with Deshaun McCullough, who's coming over from Indiana to Oklahoma. Brent Venables loves his linebackers. That's his baby. It's his position. And McCullough has all the traits to be a great one. He's super long, super athletic, pass rushing ability, but also can play off ball if needed with the athleticism to play sideline to sideline and cover. I think he's going to be huge for an Oklahoma defense that needs an upgrade.
Love that. I'm going now with, at cornerback position, I'm going with the newly minted 5-star Denver Harris from Texas A&M, going to LSU, smooth defensive back, can do it all. He had some really good games as a true freshman for Texas A&M. Really love his game.
Outstanding LSU cornerback class. At the other cornerback spot, I'm going to go with Fentrell Cypress, who's coming from Virginia to Florida State, a little bit of an ACC to ACC transfer. He was already an all-ACC corner. I think he has all the traits in the world to be an early round draft pick if he puts another strong year on tape. He's going to help a Florida State defense, again, that I've mentioned should be very good this year, and he's going to be a lockdown corner.
All right, at cornerback, I'm taking Davison Igbinosun, going to Ohio State from Ole Miss. He had 5 pass breakups as a true freshman at Ole Miss. He can match up against anybody with his size at 6'1", 203 pounds. Really like his game. All right, at safety, I'm going with R.J. Moten. He's going to Florida from Michigan. He played a big role at Michigan at times, had some really strong games. He can step right in and be a dude at Florida.
Yeah, with that other kind of hybrid nickel safety position, I'm going to go with Jahad Carter. He's going from Syracuse to Ohio State. Jim Knowles uses 3 safeties all the time in his system. I think Carter, who can play nickel, he can play both traditional safety roles. It's going to be a really nice fit, both for depth and for the talent level in that secondary that really struggled at times last year.
Great. Next, I'm taking, at our all-purpose position, I'm taking Travis Hunter, going from Jackson State to Colorado. Everybody knows the name. He could be a top 5 pick at both wide receiver or defensive back. He's going to be a household name in college football.
I'll take both of the kickers because I've really embraced the opportunity to talk about the specialist. First is James Turner, who's going from Louisville to Michigan. Turner was quietly one of the best kickers in the country last year. Huge blow for Louisville to lose him. And Michigan gets to replace Jake Moody with one of the best kickers in the country. So huge for Michigan moving forward. Jake Moody was so big for them the last couple of years, and they have another reliable kicker coming in. And for punter, I'm going with Ryan Sanborn, who's going from Stanford to Texas. Texas had nothing at kicker this spring. Sanborn enrolls this summer. He's going to be a welcome addition for a Texas team that really feels like they have all the needed pieces to make a run at the Big 12 championship and the college football playoff, and Sanborn's going to be a big part of that. So, Clint, looking at this team and looking at the construction of these defense, how do you think it would fare in normal competition against a good offense?
Well, we just talked about 2 5-stars in Denver Harris and Travis Hunter, so I think that they could really win some games. There's a lot of experience here that we just talked about, multi-year starting experience, so I think that they could win in just about any conference. We're talking about several players that went from the SEC, a lot of experience there, which I like.
I would, in all these scenarios, I need to see the depth to truly know how this would compete. But I tend to agree. I actually do think this is a team that could win the SEC. I love the secondary on this team. I think it's loaded. I think you have great cornerbacks. I think the defensive line is also excellent, which is the difference between the offense that we talked about earlier. So I could legitimately see this as an SEC championship winning team. But you can see the team behind you on the screen. Let us know if you have any comments in the chat.
Love it. So there you have it, our all-defense transfer team. You heard Chris kind of joke about how this team might fare in the SEC. A lot of big guys up front, a lot of quality players in the secondary. Once again, our all-defense transfer team. I'll go ahead and do what I love to do whenever I'm on the 24/7 Sports YouTube page, and that is ask you guys for likes. There is so much effort and attention that goes into making these rankings, picking these all-transfer teams. So go ahead and smash that like button if you have not already. We would love to see who is watching. But I'm going to go to you here. You have transferred onto the desk, to use your language here. But as you look at this all-star team, it's obvious to say that the quarterback position is the most important position. But based on what we've seen with positional scarcity, what is the most important position?
I think these two teams, what they really show us is consistent trends with prior years, right? There are certain spots you can usually go to the portal to get players. And there are certain spots where you can get a player, but you may not be able to get a high caliber player. Like, let's look at the caliber of player who's starting on this all transfer team at offensive tackle, right? Like, that's probably the most premium position out of the portal that you struggle to find. Auburn had to go to Tulsa to get its starting left tackle, right? Jeremiah Byers, the opposite starting tackle on the all transfer team, is probably going to be a guard at Florida State, right? So if you need, and we just saw Dave Biddle from Bucknuts.com talk about how Ohio State did not hit a home run in the transfer portal at the offensive tackle position. Was a home run, was a pitch there to be hit out of the park? I'm not sure it was, right? Like, Carl, the big guys, especially at offensive tackle, because the length, because you can find guards, they just ain't there, man. Like, it is really a spot. You got to recruit out of high school, or you're going to give us some sacks.
Well, Bill Parcells used to call this the human theory, and it's only so many guys in the world that are big enough to play offensive tackle, that have the size, that have the length. You're looking for guys that are between 6'6" and 6'8", that have a tremendous wingspan, and it's only so many of those guys to go around. So you have to get them wherever you get them. And sometimes they're available in the portal, but sometimes they're not. And I think that one thing that happened with guys in this spring window this year is they just said, hey, we're going to be able to address this need in the portal in the spring, and some of those guys just weren't there. And I think that was something that was unexpected from a couple of programs that missed, and they might have to go back and reevaluate the way that they handle this going into next season.
And think about the trickle down too, right? If Auburn's taken Tulsa's tackle and Ohio State's taken San Diego State's tackle, and those guys might actually profile as guards at the next level, what kind of tackler are you taking if you're like a low-level SEC team or like a bottom half Pac-12 team? Like, it's kind of getting ugly, man. Like, you're kind of having to make hard decisions. All right, this guard can move. He doesn't have great length. Can I play him here? Can I get away with that? Because the supply and demand at tackle in the portal is poor.
Well, what you're going to have to do now, you're going to have to coach. You're going to have to develop. You're going to actually have to do what they're paying you to do as a football coach when they give you $800,000 or $8 million to coach and develop a position. You're going to actually have to do that. And as much as, Emily, as we talk about high school guys and how this has affected them, this is an incredible time to be a high school guy, because now you can get one of those scholarships at a group of 5 school, at an FCS school, at a lower level school, and develop yourself into a bigger player. So right now what coaches are going to have to do is they're going to have to earn their paychecks. They just can't recruit a guy plug them and play them. They're going to actually have to coach them and get them ready to play big-time football.
If you're a 6'5" basketball player who's in that 250, 260 range, tackle.
If you're a 6'5" basketball player and you've watched the NBA Finals, you see that there's not many 6'5" guys out there. You belong on the football field. Give it a chance.
I mean, you heard it here first. This is the second transfer portal show I've done with you that just circles around how important offensive linemen are. But guys, you mentioned what this does to high school players and how it gives them more opportunity. You mentioned how coaches also have to earn the money that they're given, and they're taking a lot of this information that we're learning too about the positional scarcity and what positions are going to be available in the portal versus the ones that are not. So from a coaching perspective, Carl, how does this change and maybe recalibrate your strategy from a recruiting perspective now that you know what you might be able to find in the portal versus what you might not?
You have to look at high school guys and you have to see who you can develop and who's good enough. Sometimes those guys are going to be available at the high school level. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're going to be available at the portal level, and sometimes they're not. So you have to work it on both ends, and you have to be able to find and project the guys that are going to be there to help you win football games, because come fall, nobody's going to want to hear your excuses. I needed an offensive tackle, but I didn't get him because he wasn't in the portal. That's still going to ultimately cost you your job. So you have to be on top of it. Mega camps have started this week all over the country. You better be out there looking at those high school kids, because there are still elite high school players who can help you, Bud, win championships.
And I think if you're a personnel director, you need to take this couple years of data that we have through the portal and say, okay, if I miss in high school, what can I get? And if I miss in high school, what can I not get? And we know what you can get in the portal. Guards aplenty. I can usually get myself a receiver. You can generally find a quarterback for the most part. Corner actually is surprisingly findable. Safety this year not, but last year it was. So I'm going to take more shots and more gambles on high school kids with high upside at the positions that are not plentiful in the portal. Like, instead of taking 2 guards and 2 tackles, I'm going to take 3 tackles and 1 guard. And like, maybe if the tackle doesn't develop quite as much, I'm going to kick him down inside the guard, or I'm going to go to back to the portal for my guard. I'm probably not going to take 4 high school receivers anymore, unless my name is Brian Hartline and I just have every 5-star in the world wanting to sign to play receiver for me. So I think it does change your strategy if you're a personnel director or a head football coach of how many players you need to take at each position out of high school, with the eye towards what happens if we miss. Can we get it? Can we not?
Chess, not checkers. This is why they are paid millions of dollars to continue to look ahead with what you've got to do in classes beyond just the next one in 2024. These guys are recruiting players in 2028 and 2029, and so this is a difficult choice that they have to make, and that's why they get paid the big bucks. But we are here to talk a little bit more about some of these leveling up players. Those are the guys coming from the group of 5, the FCS, even behind, I think, Oklahoma State has a player from Division III playing for them in this transfer portal window. But guys, these are the unfortunate part about the group of 5 players. We're all excited for those guys to be able to level up and move on to the level that we know that they're all dreaming of playing at some point. But there's, of course, a loss that comes from these G5 teams, a bit of a sore subject for them as they have seen their rosters take massive hits. So here's a look at the percentage of first and second team all-conference players that have transferred out of the G5 level. The AAC seeing the most attrition with 38%. These are their all-conference players transferring out. In total, 26% of all-conference players from the group of 5 have transferred. But you see these figures. You've looked at this closely. What do these numbers signal to you?
Well, I think much like if you're a G5 coach, oftentimes your goal is to move up to the P5. If you're a guy that signs G5 out of high school, a lot of times, and Carl will tell you, like, they feel overlooked, right? And so they've proven themselves and say, hey, I can dominate the Sun Belt. I can dominate the American, give him my shot. And the Power 5 schools are like, yes, we will give you your shot. We need that depth, or we need you to come here and start. By the way, here's a little NIL money potentially. And it is a kind of a reality that you face now as a G5 football coach, that if your player's too good, and he doesn't head to the draft, he's probably not coming back to you. He's probably going to get called up to the big leagues, like Carl said to start the show.
There's no players in the country that have a bigger chip on their shoulder, guys, than guys who go to group of 5 schools. They all think that they should have went to the Big Ten, the SEC, the ACC, the Pac-12, the Big 12. They all believe in themselves like that. But what happened? They got overlooked. They're in the MAC, they're in the Sun Belt, they're in the AAC. And so now what those guys are going to do every single time is when they make first or second team all conference, they are going to move up. There's more NIL money at the top level. There's bigger exposure at the top level. And that is one of the unintended consequences of the transfer portal in NIL, is that the group of 5 is the leagues that are going to be rated. And if you're a coach at that level, you just have to be prepared for that. And it's a trickle-down effect, but you are going to lose your best players every year to the big schools. It's an easier evaluation for an SEC school to evaluate your film in the MAC conference or in the Sun Belt than it is in a lower level of high school ball where they may have misevaluated you, but they're not going to miss a second time.
Look what happened last year with Kent State, right? They played a murderer's row schedule. They played at Oklahoma. They played at Georgia. There was one more in the same year. Were all those receivers on Kent State? You mentioned Walker and Cephas at Penn State's counting on to basically save their receiver room this season. Like, oh, wait, these guys made plays against Georgia. They made plays against Oklahoma. They might be able to play for us. Like, that's a pretty high-level team they're playing against.
Nobody thought those guys were good enough to play for them coming out of high school. That's the odd part about it. But now that they go in there and they do their thing, they're expected to save some power.
And a guy given a lot of credit for developing that talent is also no longer the head coach at Kent State. Sean Lewis headed to Colorado. You're going to find these group of 5 transfers on rosters all across the country, but you'll actually find 2 in the secondary for Alabama. But it's one thing to make the jump from G5 to P5, but how big is that jump going from G5 to Alabama?
I think it's a huge jump because, like, look, it's Alabama. You're going to be playing for games that have national championship ramifications every week. They get Key, who was a very good safety for them at UAB. They also get Trey Amos out of Louisiana Lafayette. And those are our 2 high-level players from the CUSA and from the Sun Belt, respectively. And look, are they going to be superstars for Alabama? I don't think so, but they'll be useful pieces who will either start or be really key depth pieces for the Tide. And I think if you're Nick Saban, they're a great insurance policy because they have signed some no doubt young studs out of the high school level. But what if those kids aren't totally ready when week 3 Texas comes to town? And who's rolling that Texas team? Isaiah Nayor, A.D. Mitchell. You got Quinn Ewers throwing the football, right? They got a bunch of studs. You're going to need some guys who know how to run that system that Nick Saban wants to run and be able to not have coverage bust as you integrate those younger kids that you just signed from high school throughout the season.
Nobody has been more critical than the secondary play at Alabama than Nick Saban has himself. And he coaches that position still a lot himself. I'm not surprised to see him go down to the group of 5 level because the Alabama defense is very detail oriented. There's a lot of mental intricacies in the way that he wants to play defense. Some of the high school guys take a longer time getting used to it. But guys that have already played at the college level, that already understand how to pattern read, how to match read, how to play some of that split match zone that he likes to play, those guys add immediate value to the Alabama secondary. I think these guys could end up having big-time seasons for the Crimson Tide. And if Nick Saban thinks you're good enough to play DB in the SEC, then I have to agree with him.
Absolutely. Kevin Steele, obviously their new defensive coordinator, does not have a reputation for being super simple. He's going to ask a lot of his guys. And look, Caleb Downs was one of the highest-rated safeties we've ever had, right? Like, no doubt we did the high school recruiting show, and he's a stud. But if they're not ready early, that could be the loss that knocks you out of the playoff race. And I don't know how long Nick Saban's going to coach, maybe 5 more years, maybe 10 more years, who knows, but not going to coach forever. And so every year is important, and you got to make sure your team is ready from the word go.
All right, we talked about the attrition in the group of 5, and no program saw some bigger hits than that of Kent State. I'm curious, though, bigger picture-wise, I'm sure there's some Kent State fans that are watching that want to know what this means for the future of their program, but I want to know just in general, Carl, you look at what is happening to the group of 5, but we talked about some of these rosters just getting picked apart. What does the portal mean to the future of the G5?
Well, the portal means that if you're going to be a G5 coach, you have to build your program a little differently. Instead of crying about the amount of guys that you're losing to Power 5, you have to go down to FCS and get guys. You have to go down to Division II and get guys as well. Opportunities are going to come. Look at what coordinators are making now at the Power 5 level. So you are going to lose some head coaches to situations like that, like a Sean Lewis leaving Kent State and going to Colorado. But the key for a group of 5 coach right now is to continue to evaluate at a high level, continue to get talented guys, but understand that you have to replace them almost as fast as you got them. And you just have to be prepared to do that. That's the way the game is now. We can't linger on how it was in the old days, and you have to be prepared for that. And that's how you're going to keep your program going.
I think you also need to walk the fine line between trying to get guys who have that really high upside out of high school and guys who are good high school players but don't have that Power 5 size, right? Because if I take a guy out of high school who's super raw, I'm like, okay, I'm going to spend 2 years developing him. Maybe I get that third year where I think he's ready, or maybe he has a big spring game. Some Power 5 program sees that. They hear that, oh, now he's not 220 anymore, he's 271. They pluck him away. So I've invested 2 of my years in developing this kid who didn't give me anything on the field because he was crazy raw but high upside out of high school. So I get nothing out of him, as opposed to, like, look at Troy's defense last year. It was one of the best defenses in the country. Carlton Marshall set the all-time NCAA tackling record, goes undrafted because he's like 5'9" and is not that fast, just good instincts. I think the best G5 coaches who are going to sustain are the guys who are very good evaluators, who understand this is a good player who will stick on my roster because he doesn't have Power 5 measurables, but I can get something out of him and kind of create that base culture that I need and take a couple shots on his high upside guys. You can't just take moonshots all the time anymore because they're going to be gone.
What I would also say to a college coach is don't get emotionally invested right now in the time that you spent. Don't worry. You don't have to worry about 2 years from now I'm going to be upset because I developed this guy and he left. You better be worried about today and only today. This is not a relationship situation anymore where I walked you from here, now I taught you how to crawl, now you're riding the bike. This is not that anymore. You have to every year reload your roster, reload your team, get guys who can help you win. Right now, there's some high school football players that are 6'1" that are better than the guys that are 6'3". And so to go to Bud's point, maybe you should take the flyer on the better player, but actually evaluating guys who make real plays. Sometimes guys get too caught up in measurables. They get too caught up in what can happen tomorrow. But you better look at that tape and evaluate who can win today, who can play football right now. I don't need to know who can win a beauty contest. I need to know who can knock a guy off of his spot on the football field and make plays in a football game.
And if you're one of those G5 coaches and you have a big year, and that big year was as a result of guys who are going to leave or leave for the portal, you need to consider jumping. Like, look at Sean Lewis. He didn't leave for a head coaching job at Kent State. He realized, oh, shoot, I have multiple upper-level Power 5 players on my Kent State team, which historically is one of the worst programs in all of Division I. I'm going to go take a Power 5 coordinator job. He's Deion's offensive coordinator. He didn't leave for a head coach job. So it really, I think, impacts, if you're a G5 level head coach or even a coordinator, you may need to go and be a position coach at a Power 5 school if you think your roster is going to downgrade a lot in the coming years.
I love the way that both of you guys phrased it, and that we're not necessarily feeling bad for those group of 5 coaches. It does make their jobs a little bit harder, but when you make that comparison to what coaches are also able to do when they do a good job at that lower level and they're able to make that jump up, the player, of course, can experience that same level with their careers and have those opportunities. I know you talk to a lot of high school players about their dream of playing for a Power 5, and that trip might take a little twists and turns to get there and going to that lower level. So how much do you use the examples of guys that we've seen make that jump from lower level to Power 5 when you're talking to some of these high school players?
Well, I take a guy that was close to home. When I watched Cody Schrader as a high school football player, he was a guy that I coached against, and he contacted me when he was in high school and said, why I'm not going Division I. He goes to Truman State, a Division II school, and leads the nation in rushing. And now he's a starting tailback for the University of Missouri in the SEC. Those are real situations. So if you're really a baller, then you have an opportunity to go and prove yourself. You're not stuck anymore if you can really play. But if you go to a Division II school and you go to an FCS school and you can't get on the field, then what are we really talking about? And if I'm a college coach, a lot of those guys at the group of 5 level are complaining. I don't feel sorry for anybody who makes $500,000 to coach a kid's game or more. The kind of money that guys are making. You mean to tell me somebody's going to give you $800,000 and your excuse is to cry and say, big brother's picking on me? You better find a way to get it done because they're paying you to win football games, and that's your job.
It really is. You look at this, too, understanding why some of these guys make the jump, right? Like Jalen Key and Trey Amos, guys going to Alabama, they are dudes who have proven themselves on the field, a lot of experience, right? Are they physical freaks? No, but they're good enough plus the experience, right? Other guys, like look at Dalton Kincaid. He was a walk-on in the FCS at San Diego, not even San Diego State, San Diego, and he put on 45 pounds. He's like, oh, I'm a new dude. Check this out. I'm going to go to Utah and ball out and catch 500,000 balls on USC. Like Keon White, the guy that got drafted, I think, second round out of Georgia Tech. He was like a 220-pound tight end at Richmond, okay, and then puts on 55 pounds. He's like, oh, I'm better than Richmond. So if you're a high school kid out there watching this and you think you should be upper level, hit the weight room hard, right? If you're not getting on the field, like Carl said, hit the books hard because you're probably not going to play at the NFL and probably not going to get called up to the Power 5.
There's going to be high school kids this week at mega camps playing in front of every college coach in the country, and they're going to get some offers. And when they're offers at mid-tier schools, whether it's Division II, mid-level Division I, some of them are going to be sad, but they should be looking at this like the biggest opportunity in the country. I have an opportunity to go here, and if I can play dominant football, I'm still going to end up in the big time potentially, and that's a chance that I didn't have before. If I went Division II 10 years ago, if I went FCS 10 years ago, then that's just where I was going to be, and that's the way it is. But if you're really a football player, if you really have game, if you really are who you say you are, then you have the opportunity to go put that game on tape, and if you can do that, the big time is still waiting on you.
All about the mindset. There is an opportunity. How many players did we see at the portal? 3,200 players. So there is clearly a lot of movement in college football. Speaking of movement, we're going to move over to Studio B. Hey, guys.
Thanks, Emily. We're about to take a couple of user questions. We wanted to start from Charger XO. Clint, who do you think is going to make a Michael Penix leap this year? Michael Penix went from being kind of a guy that a lot of people might have wanted to replace in Indiana to a Heisman contender. Like, who do you think can make that leap this year?
Well, he's not a quarterback, but I want to say wide receiver Isaiah Nayer at Texas. He really he was hurt last year. He really complements Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell on the outside. He's a 6'3", 210, 215-pound wide receiver. He can really get over the top. He had a ton of production in 2021 against when he was with Wyoming. And I think that he'll get back on track this year and have a great season.
Yeah, Isaiah Nayer is somebody who got injured in fall camp last year. Texas thought he could be a potential #1 complement to Xavier Worthy, and he's going to be coming back. He's going to be huge for Texas. I'd probably pick Quinn Ewers, who I know you discussed about earlier. So I'm going to go a different direction there. I'm going to go Cameron Ward. He came over from Incarnate Word to Washington State last year. He played under Eric Morris as Incarnate Word head coach, as offensive coordinator. There's been a change in offensive coordinator at Washington State this offseason, but I do not change the way I feel about Cameron Ward. I think Cameron Ward has legitimate round one upside as a quarterback. And I think he had his adjustment period last season going from the FCS to the Power 5, but I know the people at Washington State are very confident this year in what Cameron Ward's capable of, and I think he could have an outstanding season in a Pac-12 conference that's going to be really pass-heavy next year.
Absolutely.
The next question is about Colorado, and I think it's been a popular one this year. The question is, the thoughts on the perception of teams like Auburn and Oregon going heavy in the portal versus Colorado, which this user thought Colorado had a more of a negative connotation attached to how they use the portal. I would respond to that Auburn and Oregon have been very aggressive using the transfer portal, adding 15, 20 players this offseason to help turn over the roster. Dan Lanning made it a priority in year one for himself. Hugh Freeze has made it a priority this year to transform his roster and really give himself a chance in the SEC this season. And Deion Sanders, to be fair, has done exactly that at Colorado. He has utilized the rules the way they are written, and he has really attacked the portal. I think the reason why there's a negative connotation to it is because he's run like 60 guys off his roster. Like, there are players who went to Colorado expecting to play under a different coach, and Deion Sanders literally cut them. There's a rule that allows them to cut players, and Deion Sanders took full advantage of it. And I think that just kind of comes with a different feel than a school taking 15 or 20 players and replacing them when you're doing it to 60 or 70% of your roster. Pat Narduzzi talked to our Brandon Marceau, our national writer, last week about that. His quote went kind of viral, but the basics of the quote was he didn't think that's how the rule was written and how it should be used. And I think that's why a lot of people have had pushback about the way Colorado does it. Like, these are not professional athletes. They're not being paid like professional athletes, but they're being cut like professional athletes. And I think a lot of people have a problem with it. But on a more positive connotation about the transfer portal, Clint, I'm curious, do you think Florida State has closed the gap on the rest of the ACC with the way they use the portal?
I do. We'll see how they play Clemson this year. They need to beat Clemson. I think that you look at the production that they've gotten from their players in the transfer portal since Coach Norvell has been there is really significant, with guys like Trey Benson, Johnny Wilson. They had some really good players on defense with Jared Verse and those guys. They got a ton of production. So you can see that the transfer portal has really, really paid off for them and has done great things. I mean, even the quarterback came from the transfer portal years ago with Jordan Travis. So, I think that this team has kind of made its base on the transfer portal, and you can tell that it's gone a long ways for them.
Absolutely. I like to think of Florida State's transfer portal strategy it used to be one of survival. Like, Mike Norvell had to survive at Florida State, and he took transfers to keep his job. There was a ton of pressure on him just 2 years ago. And now it's a strategy of contention. Florida State has transformed the roster so thoroughly and closed the gap so much that this Florida State roster is a legitimate national title contender going into this year. I think you might take Florida State's roster over pretty much everyone in college football except for maybe Ohio State, Clemson, maybe not even Alabama this offseason, and Georgia, obviously. So Florida State has put itself in a position to win the ACC, which it hasn't done in a very long time. Florida State's put itself in position to beat Clemson, which it hasn't done since 2014. So I think Florida State's absolutely closed the gap. I think the gap is closed, and I think you could argue Florida State's a co-favorite with Clemson in the ACC this year. And that's a huge change because of the transfer portal.
Absolutely.
So, Clint, was there a team in the transfer portal that did not use the portal in a surprising way?
Well, I think that the elephant in the room that everybody wants to talk about is Clemson. You have to mention Clemson. Dabo Swinney, I think that he should definitely use the transfer portal. There is some weaknesses on the team that I think that they should have addressed through the transfer portal, but he wants his own guys. He wants to develop his players. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but you're not winning national championships like Georgia. I think that he definitely needs to upgrade some of the positions on the team and especially some of the depth issues that they could have, they need to address in the transfer portal. So I think that it would be a smart decision for him to add some players for sure.
Yeah, and I think what's surprising about Clemson, and it's not surprising that Dabo Swinney doesn't want to go in the portal. He's been very clear about that. But the rest of college football has moved that direction. Even Georgia, a team that has just won back-to-back national championships, took 4 players in the transfer portal this offseason. Everybody can get a little bit better in the portal, no matter who you are. And that even goes for academic schools that have a hard time getting people in. I know Bud Elliott has talked about this a lot in the past. Like, schools like Stanford are even managing to get transfers in because it makes their roster better. Like, you just can't tell me Clemson can't get better somewhere. Like, Clemson needs an impact wide receiver. Clemson could use another offensive lineman. Like, Clemson could use an experienced cornerback. And to be fair to Dabo Swinney, he did go after Fentrell Cypress earlier in the cycle. They have kind of kicked the tires on some offensive linemen at times, but they just haven't landed anybody. And the spring window was all about adding depth. And it's surprising to me Clemson did not feel like it had a single place on anywhere in the roster where it felt like it could get a little bit better, especially when the margins of winning a national championship are so slim. Clemson hasn't receded much since it was winning national championships in the mid-2010s. It really hasn't. Clemson is still the class of the ACC, but we've seen Georgia surpass Clemson. We've seen Alabama maintain its status as a national title contender. We've seen Ohio State push. We've seen schools like USC, LSU, and Florida State come in the picture, and Clemson is largely stand pat. And I think when you have the opportunity to add players and you have the opportunity to just get a little bit better, you should take advantage of it. And it's surprising to me Dabo Swinney, 5 years into the portal's existence, still hasn't budged on that. But I'm curious, going back to Florida State, a lot of Florida State conversation here. We've got a question from the Dr. RJP, and it's for Clint, who handles our rankings. Why wasn't Keon Coleman and our all-portal team? So essentially, why wasn't Keon Coleman a top 2 receiver in this class?
Well, because we had A.D. Mitchell and some other good wide receivers like Devontae Walker, but that's not taking anything away from Keon Coleman. I mean, you see right there in the highlights, his contested catch, is his 50-50 balls, his ability on the outside to his strength through the catch, you can see is outstanding. He might be one of the best catch point wide receivers in college football with his size at 6'4", 215 pounds. I think that he's an outstanding wide receiver. I just want to see him run the full route tree. I want to know if he's a player that can, is he route limited at all? Can he only run the vertical routes or take a smoke screen, or can he run the deep digs? Can he run a double move? Can he run the full route tree? I think that's the big question I have with him, but he's an outstanding player, and I think he'll do big things for Florida State.
Clint, why are you dodging the question, man? You said, why you have AD Mitchell over Keon Coleman? I'm just kidding. I do really like Keon Coleman. I think his addition gives Florida State two of the best contested catch players in the country with Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson. If you look at those two and their stats, they are going to make plays for Jordan Travis, and he's a guy that doesn't need a lot of help. This wide receiver duo is not quite what we have at Ohio State. It's not the top of college football, but it's very, very close. I think you could put Florida State's 1-2 wide receiver duo up there with the likes of Texas, USC for that second spot. And that, when you consider all the other weapons Florida has, it makes them super dangerous. It was an excellent wide receiver group this offseason. I can understand why Clint had a little trouble slotting the top of his board, but I think the rankings have done an excellent job to illustrate the depth at that position all offseason. But that's all for the questions that we had today. I really appreciate everybody taking the time to put those in the chat. And Emily, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Appreciate Chris holding our rankings team to a high standard, making sure that they answer all the tough questions. And thank you all for submitting those questions. Look at this graphic. The Pac-12 taken the cake for the most transfers coming in, 186. We've talked about how a lot of those are going to be quarterbacks. There's, of course, the potential that every starting quarterback for the Pac-12 this season is a transfer. TBD on some of those quarterback battles and how they shape out. You got the Big 12 after them, SEC, and that is how it lays out. So they were talking a lot about receivers over there, and we want to jump in on the fun because when you look at the ACC and some of the most impactful transfers, a lot of wide receivers really come to mind. But who are you going to call your most impactful transfer in the ACC?
This was really tough, right? We've already had Clint Brewster say that Devontae Walker from North Carolina, who came from Kent State, is going to lead the country in receiving, which is bold. But Clint, I get it. I'm going to go to Tallahassee, though. I'm going to take Keon Coleman, one of the most fierce recruiting battles for a transfer portal player this year. Played with Peyton Thorne, who didn't play very well last year. Put up big-time numbers. If you look at the Sport Radar stuff, his catch rate over expected was off the charts. And he's a great complement to Johnny Wilson. So now they have 6'4" and 6'6" on the outside there in Tallahassee to go with Jaheim Bell and Kyle Morlock, their tight end tandem that they took out of the transfer portal. And I think there's actually some chance Keon Coleman is even better than Johnny Wilson. If that's the case, LSU might be in some trouble, come Labor Day weekend, and Florida State might be a team that you could think make a deep playoff run.
How about that? The ACC actually has the fewest amount of transfers added in the conference in the Power 5 with just 130. A few spots above them is the Big 12. Actually, the second most with 186. A lot of great skill position talent coming into that conference in the offseason. Who's your pick for most impactful?
I think I'm going to go Eddie Mitchell at Texas. You heard from the Georgia staff last year, wait till you see Eddie Mitchell. Eddie Mitchell's the guy that gives our defense a lot of problems in practice, even though he did miss most of the year. He did have a big-time spring game for them at Texas with that impressive catch. They also get Isaiah Naylor back. I'm going to shout out my man Carl there who picked Trayshawn Ward. Trayshawn Ward, an excellent back for Kansas State. They do have to replace Deuce Vaughn, who went to the Dallas Cowboys there in the draft. So a really nice transfer portal haul for both those squads.
Yeah, you look at need, but then also just the sheer talent that is coming into some of these teams. Let's move to the Big Ten. 142 transfers for you to pick from. Who's your most impactful in that group?
This came down to either Tanner Mordecai at Wisconsin. It makes sense to go with the quarterback, but I'm going to go with Dante Cephas at Penn State. I talked to our guys at Lions 247, and they said, look, they need Cephas to come in and be the number one for Penn State to reach the potential. You have Drew Allar, you have Singleton, you have an awesome defense with Chop Robinson, but they need that alpha in the receiver room I think Cephas has that ability, and he's got to come in there and do it. You're not a guy that can get in academically for spring, so he's going to have to be some comes in over the summer. But you see the catches there, a number of big-time catches against Power 5 competition. Physically, Emily, I think he can do it, so he's my number one impact guy in the Big Ten.
Okay, you haven't picked a quarterback yet. Going to the Pac-12 now, I'm hoping, maybe thinking that you'll pick a quarterback for the most impactful transfer, but I'm not going to put words in your mouth. Who is it for the Pac-12?
No, I am. I'm going Shedeur Sanders, right? Like I don't know if I love Shedeur Sanders as much as some people do, but clearly a major upgrade for Colorado. I think he understands how to operate this Sean Lewis offense. They have big-time weapons there for him to throw to now at Colorado. If the offensive line can stay healthy, because I'm not sure about their O-line depth, I think the starters may be okay there, then I think Colorado could increase its win total from 1 to maybe 3, 4, 5. If they get a lot of lucky breaks, maybe they can make a bowl game somehow. I think Shedeur Sanders will do a really nice job there.
Hard to pick among Colorado transfers with 50 incoming. I want to know, though.
You see on the screen that the Pac-12, 186 transfers, they have 12 teams. They're averaging like 15 transfers per team. That's kind of nuts.
That's insane. Okay, so along those lines, I'm going to ask you, surprise, to pick one more in the Pac-12 that you want to highlight as an impactful. I mean, they have so many and fewer teams. So who's one more name that you can give us?
I'm going to shout out Greg Biggins, who talks about like the type of bodies that they do and do not have out on the West Coast at the high school ranks. And it's those big interior defensive linemen. They're pretty rare out there west of the Rockies. And USC didn't find one west of the Rockies. They found one in Georgia. They got Bear Alexander from Georgia, could make a big-time impact for them. Playing that nose guard, he can also play some 3, I think, if they want to. That's a guy that can elevate their defense from like the 70s to maybe like the 30s. And if you give Lincoln Riley a top 30 type defense, we've seen this. At Oklahoma, he took Georgia to the wire in that famous Rose Bowl football game. So I think USC will still score a bunch of points, and Bear Alexander had a nice national title game as well. If he can make an impact for USC's defense, he's my pick for the number 2 there.
Speaking of national champs, we know the last 3 have come out of the SEC. What's pretty nuts is those teams, 3 teams, that's only 2 between Georgia and Alabama, but 3 total teams that won national championships, they combined for 1 transfer. Obviously, things have changed a little bit this year. We've talked about the new additions at wide receiver for Georgia, and you're seeing what Alabama did, specifically with some of the cornerbacks. But in the SEC, there's a lot of transfers to choose from. Who's your most impactful?
I'm going to go with Devin Leary, the quarterback transfer from NC State to Kentucky, right? So Kentucky's losing Will Levis to the NFL draft, a big-time talent, and didn't have quite the year last year that maybe some people thought he would have. But we also saw something last year from Kentucky, and that was when Will Levis got hurt, and they had to play South Carolina. I think he missed part of one other game. They were unplayably inept at the quarterback position. Like the guys that Kentucky had behind Will Levis just could not play SEC football, and they're not playable, right? I'm not trying to bag on these kids, but like South Carolina's offense did nothing the entire game, and they basically won it on pick sixes and turnovers. So for Kentucky to get Liam Cohen back at offensive coordinator, which I think is a major upgrade over the coaching situation that they had last year, and to reunite him with a player who, if healthy, in Devin Leary, has a big-time arm, has played a lot of college football. I mean, he's probably started 30 or 40 ball games for the NC State Wolfpack. I think that really prevents Kentucky from having the backslide that they could have had if they had to play the guys that we saw play last year. So Cohen plus Leary, I like that a whole lot. That's a nice little Levis replacement there for the Wildcats.
We'll throw in plus Ray Davis, too. 3 biggest additions.
Ray Davis is a great kid.
Yes. We're going to see a lot of turnover on that Kentucky offense. A lot of positive things, though. I know Cats fans, the one that's in my ear right now, our producer, very excited about what's to come for Kentucky this upcoming season. We're going to transfer now to our next segment, which is Take a Closer Look. Actually, we're going to take a closer look here at the transfer portal team rankings. We're going to go tier by tier. We talked a lot of Colorado on the show, but I want you to pick your favorite transfer portal team from this group, 1 through 5.
This is tough because I think all of these teams in the top 5 have increased their win total for the coming year over what it would be if they didn't have these guys by at least a full win, and maybe 2, right? In some cases, like Colorado might have increased it by 3 or 4 wins because they took 50 or 60 guys. The number keeps rising almost every single day. I will go with Florida State here because when you have a roster that's as good as they already had, right? They won 10 ball games last year. It's tough to upgrade your roster. It's a little bit easier to upgrade your roster if you can get the kids to say yes, if you're at like a 1-win team, right? And Dion, I think the challenge there is acquiring the quality depth. With Florida State, as we see, Fentrell Cypress is a guy who was one of the best corners in the ACC last year. His PFF grade was off the charts. Jaheim Bell was so athletic that when South Carolina had problems running the football, they threw him back there at running back, right? Braden Fisk from Western Michigan, one of the best players in the MAC, a real impactful guy who can rush the passer from the 3 or the 5 technique position. Keon Coleman, we already talked about. Like, I think he's in the conversation for the best receiver in the portal, to be frank. Jeremiah Byers, one of the best offensive linemen. He's definitely going to start for them. He might be their best offensive lineman immediately. So for Mike Norvell, it's a team, they're all in this year. They're trying to cash this in and make the college football playoff. I think Florida State is the one there.
Adding a lot of quality players, too. You saw that graphic. A lot of players that we ranked in the 90s, only 2, but they were not in the 90s, but they were still in the high 80s. Yeah. So a lot of quality coming in, a slightly smaller class than what we've seen the last couple of years as Norvell was continuing to churn over that roster. However, though, they do have the second highest in terms of net transfers, 10 in, 22 out. But again, bringing in that quality and the guys that Norvell wants in this system. Let's go to the top 10 here, 6 through 10. A lot of great options here. Ole Miss, you look at that number, 23 total transfers coming in for Lane Kiffin. But of this group, of this tier, which class do you like the best?
There's so many to choose from. I'm going to go to the Pacific Northwest. I'm going to go with Oregon. Let's take a look at what they're bringing in, because I think they did a really strong job here. I was talking to Jackson Moore, who covers a lot of our Mountain West Conference teams, yesterday on Cover 3 podcast, previewing Fresno State, and they're like, man, their safety that Oregon got, we kind of thought was going to go to the NFL, right? Like not go play for Oregon. So that's a major get. I think getting Nishad Strother from East Carolina is an underrated pickup for them. He's a nice player for them. Jordan Birch from South Carolina, big-time pass rusher. I know South Carolina was fighting tooth and nail to get him back in the fold. In our earlier segment, we talked with Carl about the inability to get quality offensive tackles. Well, Johnny Cornelius from Rhode Island is a player that we profiled on this show. Like, that may be a dude, and it's so hard to get good tackles in the portal. Oregon may have got one, so I'm going to go with Oregon.
AJ Cornelius was a hot name when we did our Transfer Portal Palooza show back in December. He was one of the biggest guys to hit that portal, and somebody that probably not a lot of fans had heard about, but they definitely know his name now. Hey, thank you so much again for watching the show today and for commenting and submitting all of your questions. I'm going to ask one more thing, though. If you will, please go ahead and hit that like button. We would love to see how many people are watching. Yeah, Bud showed you how to do it. You just takes one finger. It's so easy there. All right, let's go to 11 through 20. A lot of great classes in these options. We talked about what Kentucky has added with the number 2 quarterback in our portal rankings in Devin Leary. He is the headliner. But what do you like so much about this Kentucky class as a whole?
I think it's about meeting the needs. Like, Kentucky had legitimate needs that needed to be met immediately, because the drop-off in the SEC, you could go from being a mid-level SEC team. If you don't hit the needs in the portal, you could be the bottom team or maybe the second bottom team with Vanderbilt there in the East. They get Devin Leary, who we already talked about. They get J.Q. Hardaway from Cincinnati, who's a really quality corner. They needed help there. Ray Davis is a nice running back from Vanderbilt. They get some offensive line help. I think they needed numbers there quite a bit. Like, Cortland Ford had a nice 2021, a little bit of a down 2022 for USC, but that's certainly a player who could come and help them. And Keyshawn Silver on the inside. Remember, they lost Justin Rogers to Auburn, one of their top nose guards. But if Silver can come in and give them a pass rushing presence from the inside, I think Mark Stoops has to be thrilled with this class.
Yeah, we've talked extensively about how difficult it is to find quality offensive linemen, and you look at Kentucky's transfer class, and they seem to be snatching up all of those offensive tackles.
If you have stud offensive linemen in your class, I'm probably picking you, because you can get most every other position out there if you do your homework. Offensive linemen, there's just not many.
Yeah. I'm going to hold you to that, because we got another tier to go through here, and that is the top 30. Those are teams 21 through 30 in our brand new updated transfer portal rankings. A lot of great options here. You got some new head coaches potentially seeing how they're building their new staffs. What stands out to you in this group?
A lot of really good work being done. Obviously, you have to acknowledge Wisconsin, but I'm going to head to a team that's made back-to-back college football playoffs, and they're the only one here that didn't take at least 10 transfers. They took 8. So I think it tells you something that they only have 8 transfers, but they're still in our top 30. And what it tells you is quality. And Emily, you told it, hold me to it. What's it say right there?
I see some offensive linemen.
3 offensive linemen in the 90s. Michigan, you are the pick. They're going to throw Ernest Hausman on as our top linebacker in the transfer portal. Josiah Stewart was an absolute beast. If you guys watch any of the Sun Belt, Coastal Carolina kid, I like him a whole lot. Stanford's going to miss Miles Hinton and Drake Nugent a lot. I mean, they're probably going to have a pretty bad year because they don't have those guys on. Jack Tuttle's an interesting tight end take for them. They hit their needs. They needed to have quality depth. What happens if you have a guy go down? They're trying to make a playoff run for the 3rd straight year, and you hit the needs with elite talent. So they're my pick.
Yeah, you You mentioned the fact that they have only 8 commits. That's the fewest in the entire top 25. So picking that quality over quantity. Let's branch out to just all of it. Who's a class that maybe we need to highlight that's beyond that top 30?
I think you probably have to take a look at a team that didn't use the portal last year really at all, and that was Georgia, right? And so this year they said, you know what? I know we just won back-to-back national titles, but what if we can do better? So they do lose A.D. Mitchell to Texas, but they go and they get Dominic Lovett from Missouri, who was one of the leading receivers in the SEC last year. They also go to Mississippi State and land a couple quality receivers there. I think Georgia acknowledging that, hey, we have a new quarterback coming in. We'll make things as easy as possible for him. Let's get him a lot of quality targets here at receiver. That's definitely one to look at. Utah, if I can highlight too, is also a pretty fun one. They get Levani Damuni from Stanford. He's an all-conference linebacker. They actually have a lot of players on that team who are former transfer. I think we'll do a really nice job there for the Utes as they look to defend that Pac-12 title in what is a loaded Pac-12 this year.
Yeah, we talk a lot of recruiting, obviously, here, and you see these headlining teams, these guys that always bring in the big-time classes, like a Georgia, but the transfer portal is completely different in terms of strategy and how these coaches use it differently. And so you're going to see some of these big-time programs, like a Michigan down maybe at 25, and like Georgia, what are they, 50, 30, 58? I mean, for the defending national champions to think that, they're not super active because they don't have to be because of what they're able to do in the recruiting ranks. And speaking of, we're going to kind of hit you with some final takeaways here. And you mentioned a little bit about the losses that Stanford saw. And we're going to see the effect of the transfer portal really hit hard on some of these group of 5 schools. But when it comes to these academic institutions, how are they feeling the heat from this portal?
And I'll take the hit for this because I coined this academic institutions. That's a ridiculous term. Like, all these institutions are technically academics, right? Like, they're all doing academics on some level, but
there's a different level for some of them, though.
Yeah, the high-level academic institutions maybe a little bit tougher to get into. So you're Stanford, Northwestern, most years Cal, Vanderbilt, Virginia. I think Boston College, they can't take a million transfers. I think these schools are largely suffering. And by the way, the service academies, our Army and Navy can't take any transfers, basically, right? So I think they're suffering a little bit in the transfer portal era because if they have good players and they're not having good seasons, those guys are going to look elsewhere, but they're not able to replace them at the same level. Stanford's only taken 4 transfers. They're going to be well under the 85 scholarship mark this year. Most teams don't operate far under the 85 scholarship mark anymore because they can fill those empty spots via the transfer portal. I was talking to Jackson Moore yesterday about Fresno State, and he was like, yeah, Northwestern took this kid from Fresno State, the defensive tackle. He's a 4th stringer. Yeah. At 4th string Mountain West kid, Northwestern needs this guy to come and play in the Big Ten. Like that, how do you think that's going to work? I'm not sold. So it really, if you're a guy coaching or running personnel at one of these, let's call them smart schools, it's tough to get players in. They don't accept very many credit hours. A lot of them's like, all right, we'll take 60 credit hours, which, hey, you better be taking a young kid then, because if you're only taking 60 and the guy's already done 90, he's probably not picking you. Either young guys or grad transfer only.
Yeah, definitely a tough road ahead for some of these schools. It's interesting to see. This is our first time looking at what the transfer portal window process looks like. And so this is what today was all about, was tying a bow on all of that, making sure you didn't miss a thing from the off season and making sure you're ready to go. So, when fall comes around, you're not watching your team saying, who's that guy? So hopefully you learned a little bit on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us. For Bud Elliott, for Carl Reed, for Clint Brewster, and for Chris Hummer, this was Transfer Portal All Access.